Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time you are joining us. Welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. If you are familiar with us, we are simply just a book club who come together, who are passionate about reading, and we talk and we share, we agree, we disagree, as we work through one book at a time together, from chapter to chapter to chapter. You are more than welcome to join us on this journey. In fact, we would love you to join us on this journey. The book that we are reading today, we will be reading over the next few weeks, is a book entitled "Troubling the Water" by Ben McBride. Does anyone, maybe John or D, if you're able to, thank you very much. This is a book that we are diving into, an urgent, the urgent work of radical belonging by Ben McBride. If you want to follow along and you want access to the book, you can click the link in the description and it will take you directly to the Amazon portal where you can order the book via audio book or physical book, however which way you would like to follow along with us. We encourage you to add it to your library and join us on the journey as we read chapter to chapter and we share with you our thoughts and our reflections. With us on today's episode, in the order of what I see on my screen, John, then we have Darlene, and we have Jessica, and we have Annabelle. I want to thank you all for taking the time to come and join us on this journey as we unpack what we get from this book. And hopefully, we have something to walk away with. So, without further ado, we're going to dive in. Today's uh, agenda is the introduction and chapter one. We're going to share our thoughts on what we thought, what really stood out for us, what made us think. So let me start off by really talking about an initial reflection that I had, and you guys feel free to respond if you want. So I'm going to read to you a quote. I can't quote pages because I'm on the digital version, but it looks like I'm on page six. I think I'm on page six. Here's the quote. Um, but this time, in this moment on my front steps, I realized I was the one who had to change. I had to recognize that I was the outsider here. I wasn't born and raised in East Oakland. I had moved into their neighborhood and I had brought along my privilege, my power, my preconceived notions of how things should be. All right, this is a commentary that the author writes on a story that he tells when he comes home from work and he's about to enter the steps to go into his own home. And there's a man sitting on the steps, just hanging out, just doing his thing. And he he talks about some of the uncomfortable feelings where he feels a little unsafe that there is a stranger sitting on the steps of his house and how he chooses to interact with this man in his head. He's going through all kinds of vulnerable things where he's worried for his safety or the safety of his family. This random guy is just sitting there on his steps after coming home from work. He's new to the neighborhood. He just bought the house with him, his wife, and his children. They moved in, and he now has to face this man. And he eventually offers this commentary where he realizes that he needs to take the extra effort to engage with this man rather than just say, "Oh, you get off my property." And it's quite interesting where he eventually finds out that this man hanging out on his steps, this house he used to live there as a child. He used to grow up and he used to enjoy that time there. And it changes the whole dynamic of how he sees this man. And he kind of sets the book going with him recognizing that when you start to change your position, you start to see things with a brand new perspective. To me, the first chapter really just arrested my attention to the amount of times that I jump to conclusions and judgments about people before engaging with them or the subject matter when it comes to trying to protect myself, advocate for myself, um, and just maintain my position. And I think one of the things that's quite challenging that I think Ben McBride does is at least for me, he forced me to really think about what does it take for me to change my perspective so that I can actually see someone for who they really are. Let me stop there. Those are my initial reflections. Who wants to jump off the back of that? What did the introduction bring out for you?
So I was aggravated with it, as to be honest with you, completely honest. Um, as I was, going through the introduction, I don't know. My initial thoughts are, oh gosh, not this again. And what did I jump into here? Um, and I realized.
What do you mean not this again?
Well, I think not this again, as in, I'll get into it in a second.
Okay.
So I thought to myself, why is it bringing up such hostile feelings for you?
Mm,
Like, I mean, yes, this is a, great subject matter to discuss,
mm,
and, why not, and all that kind of jazz. But I realized that what it was bringing up was more of a feeling of protection. And I like the word that you used, was protection. The hostility was equivalent, or the irritability was equivalent to a sense of protection. The book was focusing on my need to constantly protect myself, and, you know, compared to other places that I've lived in,
mm,
there is a sense of increased need to protect myself here.
mm,
He talks about, I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but he talks about policing the police,
mhm, mhm,
and, and basically, when Ferguson and all of that, when it was going on. And I remember having my own situation where, during that time, or any other time, I've been pulled over by the police, and
mm,
I'm a speed demon. And, and, every time, start sweating, shortness of breath comes up.
mm,
I literally like put my hands on the steering wheel, and I'm frozen,
mm,
and it's like just, panic, sheer panic.
mhm,
And, on one occasion, my Bella was, I think, 5 months, 5 or 6 months.
mm,
She's in the back seat, and I'm putting my hands on the steering wheel, and I'm looking over, even as I'm like shaking.
mm,
But, I wind down the window, and I said, good evening, officer. My daughter is in the back seat, so she might cry. And, I can't reach he's asking for my license. I'm sorry, but I can't reach. There's this immediate sense of, um, this is traumatizing.
mm,
And why is he talking about this? I don't want to talk about this right now.
mm,
Just let's read a book about fairy tales and evergreens, okay? Um, and so, and it also brings up the fact that, there are different types of, racism out there, right? So the racism or the prejudice that I might experience in the UK looks a lot different than what I experience here, than what I experience in Canada, than what I experience in Jamaica. Bias looks a whole lot different. And the
mm,
bias here is just, it can be so antagonistic and so
mhm,
unsafe at times.
mm,
So that's what I mean by it was so like initially so aggravating. And it wasn't aggravation, it was a sense of I'm not safe right now.
mm,
Not safe. I don't want to talk about this, like kind of like, a child who has gone through their own set of abuse. I don't want to talk about this. Like, and I'm not usually like that about this subject. It was
mhm,
just, it was interesting. I thought it was really interesting because, just kind of evaluating my own emotions towards it. But that was my initial reaction.
Thank you for being so vulnerable. Those are quite intense feelings. Anyone else who wants to chime in?
Yeah, the introduction where he talks about creating a radical belonging.
Hmm.
And the first thought that came into my mind was Jesus's ministry.
Hmm.
I mean, I think that's what he was doing.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's what he was doing. and he ended up on the cross. Wow, this is going to be dangerous.
Yeah.
That was my first thought.
Yeah.
But I think that, oh, he talks about changing the world. And I wish we can change the world. And I know I'm being kind of pessimistic about this, but I'm like, I don't think this world is going to ever change.
You
And
think it was pie in the sky?
hmm?
You think it was a pie in the sky kind of concept?
I don't think that,
Okay.
because there's huge part of me, even if we cannot change the world, definitely we can change ourselves.
Okay.
And in that way, we can affect changes, and because us being Christian, we know that the world is becoming colder and colder place, and all this just bad things going to be happening more. It's been happening more and more. Yet, I believe as Christians, as followers of Christ, we have responsibility to affect changes, even if it is just within our circle, and it may not be the whole entire world. But so in that way, I definitely I see where Annabelle's coming from. Given your history, and yeah, I don't know all of it, but yet just from what small amount that I know, I totally see, I understand where you're coming from. For me, it was, well, I am glad we're talking about this. I think it's very timely. It's something that obviously that been, it's, I think it's something that's, the whole world, I feel like has been, is just othering and seeing others as our enemies and not friends. And so it's very appropriate that we're talking about this right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I've got so much to say, but I can't just take over. John or Jessica? Anyone
Yeah, I was
wants
going to
to chime in?
say, I appreciate Annabelle speaking up because I'm kind of clear on the other side of this whole equation. And it took me a long time and a lot of reflection, a lot of discussion with a lot of people to even begin to understand the huge disparity there is here in this country and how um, that those feelings you get when you get pulled over are terrifying in ways that I don't even understand. Um, and and I appreciate your courage in speaking up about that because it's been decades to kind of come to that understanding and to even be able to appreciate it, even though I I don't like getting pulled over. I mean, blue lights behind me makes my heart race, but I'm not worried about dying. I'm just worried about getting in trouble and it costing me some money. And there's a big difference between that. I
Mm-hmm.
the big thing I took away from the introduction was this guy that's on his porch, and that's what Sam was reading about. He starts out the introduction by saying, "There he was again." So obviously this guy's been here before. Obviously the author's not too happy about it, but somehow obviously the um, author decided to kind of pull back and start a conversation. And that's what I like about this book club. I think a lot of it is just a conversation where you get a better understanding. And all of a sudden, it's not this other guy, which is the word he uses a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
this is one black guy talking to another black guy. But all of a sudden, it's the guy that used to live in the house and he's just hanging out to kind of appreciate the moment. And he mentions, and I appreciate the fact that the author had enough introspection to mention that forces, and this is Sam's quote was on page 3. On page 4, it says, forces that neither one of us created had put him outside that
Mm-hmm.
house. And those forces, presumably same forces, had now put me inside it. And he's saying, you don't belong here, but all of a sudden he's questioning himself. Well, now all of a sudden maybe I don't belong here because this guy's been here a lot longer than me. He has a lot more history with this place than I do. And so I think that conversation can lead to a better understanding. But I also agree with what Dee said. I mean, he's in chapter 1 starts talking about this othering, and I get it, but I'm just overwhelmed by how many possible layers there could be.
Mm,
And do you ever get past that, or is it just a process that every experience you have in your life you have to be careful about and just
mm,
peel back those layers to try to get some depth in it? And maybe that is what life is. And in a lot of ways, I agree with what Dee said. Jesus coming down to earth showed us what God was like, and we would have no comprehension at all, but he chose to come and live with us to create that conversation and a better understanding of him. And so
mhm,
I think in a lot of ways, that's I'm hoping what he gets to in this book,
mhm.
uh, which I've just started with the rest of you.
Sure. Thank you for that, Jessica.
Um, when I read the introduction, it was kind of like, oh, wow, I don't know if I want to get into this. Like Annabelle said it, like I cannot speak for the African American community because even if I'm a person of color, it's not my place to talk in their behalf. But I can talk about my experience. And as a brown woman, it is like I feel like what Annabelle felt like, oh, I don't know if I want to go into this. But at the same time, I recognize the need to have these conversations in the Christian community
Mm,
and the way he was talking. And I saw his compassion to understand that he came from a privileged place, from another city into their home.
suburban.
And the way he tried to understand and see as a Christian that we need to do change. We need to include everyone and have these
Mm,
difficult discussions with people. And I've been there. A
mm,
few years ago, I joined a social justice group, and we talk a lot. It was like a lot of different communities. We talk about a lot, and I learned a lot about it. But one of the things that actually it brought, it just came to my head when I was reading the introduction. I learned something that is learn how to listen without preparing to attack the other person.
mm, mm, mm,
Learn how to listen with trying to understand what that people is coming from. And that's what he did with this guy. He said
yeah.
he kind of like understand and what he did with the talking to the police, and he kind of like knows that it's not gonna be an easy fix and we're gonna fix it all. But he said like it was less killing, more talking, less police brutality against this young man and this woman. And it shows you that it makes a difference. Yes, it takes a lot of work. Yes, it
Mm,
takes a lot of difficult conversations, but we're getting there. At some point,
mm.
we'll get there. And that was just something that it was like. And then he says at the end, how are we walking this walk?
Yeah. I have to be honest and say I'm a little bit uncomfortable when you said we will get there. I'm not sure there. I think there needs to be defined a bit more, I think. I'm a little bit with D where I felt uncomfortable and maybe my pessimism kicked in because I think this work has a lot less to do with getting to a destination than it has to do with just being part of the work. And so an example, I I appreciated he made a distinction between belonging and radical belonging. So belonging, which to me I have passed many a times as just feeling like I am part of, but it's not in that what he described in his book is just it's just not enough to strive for this feeling. He pushed the notion of radical belonging, which I quote, radical belonging means co-creating with the perceived other to widen the circle of human concern. I got the feeling as I read through his initial takeoff in this book, I questioned whether I had what it takes to be a part of this work, because it would require me to be ready to sacrifice.
And I do understand where you're coming from. And after I finished chapter 1, I like this said, maybe I cannot change the world, but I can start with me. And one of the things I've been doing over the years, and where he talks about the Black Lives Matter march and all the stuff that happened before, I do recognize that within my community, the Latino community, there's a lot of racism against other minority communities. I do acknowledge it. And the best thing, sometimes things are very, very in our bias. The best thing that someone ever told me is like, it's not the other community's job to educate you, it's your job to educate yourself. And I cannot change the world, but he talks about in chapter 1 about how do we expose our kids or ourselves to other communities. And to me, it's like, how can I walk this walk? Was like educating myself, working on myself, looking into myself, into my biases.
Right.
Because sometimes we don't even know we have them there. And it's really hard to do that introspection inside of you and see like, oh, how did I do better? And it's not easy, but I think that's how we start, like working on ourselves and looking into stuff that, oh, I didn't know, because I honestly have learned a lot about things I didn't know that they were not okay. But it is hard.
I think that's huge, is just recognizing where you aren't seeing what you need to see to actually be present in the moment. And that gets us to chapter 1, where he talks about the trip he made, and at the Damascus Gate, he's with this group of people, and there's 3 black men he describes in 3 different areas.
Yep.
And while whatever's going on is going on, they see the soldiers detain this Palestinian man, and no one else in the group even saw that. And it was interesting to me because, the question is, would I have seen it or wouldn't I? But then my response to myself was, well, there's things that I see just from my background and my perspective that other people aren't going to necessarily see. And that doesn't make me better or worse. It's just my perception. But I think what he's getting at, and again, I haven't read the whole book, this is just kind of just the beginning, but I think what he's getting at is, a lot of what we do to be present in the moment and to have the ability to make some changes is to identify where there's problems, and then hopefully it gives us some instruction on what to do once you identify it. I don't know.
It's interesting because, at the same time, I do wonder, is this about the journey more so than the end point? Kind of what you
Right.
were saying, Sam. Growth happens when you appreciate the present tense of the journey. The other thing too is that, I like that idea of perception, because what we perceive is incredibly powerful. I think about, even with that example, I thought it was incredibly spot on in terms of, you know, basically, did you see that, what was going on? Um, and I thought about my own experience. My ex, he is from Mississippi. My dad, he grew up, he grew up in Jamaica and the UK, and then, came over here in the 60s or 70s, did school over here as an immigrant and, treated very differently because of his accent and, all of this stuff. And but the year that, he would be from the silent generation, or I can't remember what they call it nowadays. And but I look at my ex and I remember visiting Mississippi with him. And I remember feeling in shock and awe and wanting to get out of there like right away
Mm,
because it was so unusual.
mm,
He is from this very small town, one traffic light, and in the town, I think they got rid of the traffic light.
mm,
On one side you have the black neighbors, on the other side you have the white neighbors,
mm,
and neither talk to each other, but all the black neighbors talk to each other, all the white neighbors talk to each other. And I'm thinking to myself, this is ludicrous. This is crazy. What are you doing?
mm,
But to him and his family, this is completely normal.
mm,
What's wrong with this? What are you talking about? This is just how things are.
mhm,
My father, who's coming from a totally different generation,
mm,
I might, explain, hey, um, the way that this waitress singled us out to leave, this is inappropriate.
mm,
No, this is Canada, and about, they welcomed us. It's totally fine. This is a totally different country. Totally fine. So, even kind of even within the community itself and generationally so, and politics wise, right? That perception changes over time of what a human being will tolerate and how we
mm,
define humanity.
mm,
So kind of like you all, I was a bit perplexed in that, in terms of, okay, what are we talking about here? Um, what are we really talking about here? Because once again, I don't think that we're getting to an endpoint, but I think we're understanding the layers
mhm,
of, this concept of othering, this concept of poverty.
mhm,
Looking at the United States, it's actually a poor country.
mhm,
It's in the sense that, we don't provide health care to everybody. We don't provide excellent social services to everybody. You want to take maternity leave, you take 2 months off, not the full year, right? Unlike the vast number of countries elsewhere, right?
mm,
Um, and so there is the competition, and so there's the caste system, and and it goes on and on. But I'm gonna stop
mm. No, thank you for sharing.
now.
So, I mean, is the word he's using for othering the same as perception? Because I like perception better because I think I understand it, but at the same time, perceptions can sometimes be correct and then sometimes can be totally incorrect. And a lot of it's based on background. And
No, I don't think he's used. I don't think they're synonymous. I think othering is a whole in intentional and disparaging thing.
He almost uses
yeah,
Perspective,
it as a verb in a
yeah,
sense, yeah.
yeah,
I
it
think
does.
I think othering happens because we don't value that particular person, or we
Hmm.
don't value that particular group of people. And because we self-humanize them,
Yeah.
they become others.
got it.
Hmm.
And this is where the dislike, the hatred, all that grows in your heart. I like the way he talked about doing and becoming,
I
Hmm.
was
because we
just looking
know
at that.
that Pharisees have been doing, following the law of God, doing it, and well, how did they turn out? Whereas
Hmm.
Jesus came and really taught us to become, live that word. And I think I think this is why, even though we're wondering like, where is this going? It's not going to change the world, but for us to become, you know, in kind of a human being where
Mm,
we put equal value to other
mm,
people, to other
mm.
person.
I think one of the things that I found incredibly hard as I navigated those pages was trying to ascertain my Christian identity. And the reason why I say that is because I'm just going to be honest and say we, the church, have done a bad job where we have essentially over decades, in the name of Jesus, chosen to other people. And that's really quite the bitter taste in the mouth, because we have justified segregatory movements over the years, all in the name of holiness. And now, one could say we're trying to move away from that, but it still exists in, I'm not going to call it microaggressions, but it exists in the background where we aren't always aware that we do it. Like, I'll give an example of how we tend to do it politically, where we other people who are Republicans or we other people who are Democrats. And we tend to create these lines where we either will go to the extremes where we don't want nothing to do with them, or we don't want to interact with them, or whatever it is, whichever side that you sit on. And, there was one really challenging thing that he said. I can't quite remember where he said it, but he said, oh, yeah, he said that spirituality asks us to recognize that even the racist children of God are children of God.
Mm.
Oof, that hit me, man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
was a lot to deal with, because I put my hand up and I say, I have been responsible of othering others in the name of I'm on the right path and I'm fine and there's nothing wrong with me. I found that very challenging.
It's interesting too because I know as I was reading this portion, I was thinking about the church and joining the church and discovering that there is a separation within the Adventist church in terms of conferences, and you
Yep.
have more of a black conference, or
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the other conference. You
Mm-hmm.
have Oakwood, and then Walla Walla or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting to me to, when I just as a new Adventist at the time, to
Mm-hmm.
discover that it was just uh, like
Mm-hmm.
why, you know? But then I was just like, well, I kind of see some other people here, some colored folk here, so maybe it's not too bad. Uh,
Yeah, but when you're having to say that, it means it is bad. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think at the expense of being totally woke, which is, I mean, when Sam was talking, I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, but where does it come from? Well, look at our leadership. I mean, line them up, take a picture, and you got all these elderly, stately, Caucasian males that have been in the church their whole lives for multiple generations, and they're our leadership. So I
Yep.
mean, when there's positions that need to be filled, they're filling it with their own, and
Mm-hmm.
it's ultimately going to trickle down so that, I think, it creates a little bit of a problem that, I mean, you're right, Sam. I mean, it's hard not to look at the church and, look at it from that perspective. I don't know if he's going to talk about that, but there's certainly, as a church organization, I mean, I guess I feel a little bit like D, where, what can we do to change it? And unfortunately, I don't think anyone on this panel is going to be able to change it, but I think we can change our more immediate communities, starting with our families and our schools and our churches where, are where we interact with others. I mean, that's as best as I can as I can go right now, and I'm hoping to learn more and maybe be better at that at some point. But
It's interesting too because when Christ came, I mean, you had people who wanted him to change, to turn the world upside down, right? And then you had people who didn't, they weren't ready to welcome that,
Mm-hmm.
right? They weren't willing to stop the othering or stop the ritualizing,
Yep.
um, the
and
religiosity.
ironically enough, the people he had the hardest time with was the church leadership at that time.
Mm.
So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
maybe we're seeing a pattern. I don't know. And it's for some reason, there seems to be a lot to be gained by being in leadership position in church. And I don't know if it's because you feel like you have God backing you
Mm,
or what, but it seems like a slippery slope in a lot of ways.
yeah.
I think it's the power, right? He talks
Mm,
about the four quadrants. It's really
Oh, that's
interesting.
right.
The powerful,
mm,
the privileged, the persecuted, and the
mm.
prevented.
Yeah.
And it really like right, like we've been studying the Ellen G. White's books, and it's just all about power and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It is. Jessica, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm processing everything you guys are saying, but when you talk about all the, this is a personal thing I have with the church when it comes to the church. I have a big problem with the church when it comes to justifying all the horrible things that has been done in the name of religion.
Mm,
And I have actually one of the things that in the chapter 1 he talks about is us and having these discussions with people. I have a friend of mine. We've been friends for over 20 years. She was she was raised in a very religious household, and recently we were having a conversation with, believe me, it took a lot of me to have compassion and empathy to try to understand where she was coming from, her, the way she grew up, the way she thinks, the way she justifies these horrible things that were done to other people, and up to today, outing other communities or thinking they're not worthy of Jesus, or they're, that what you said. I felt that. I felt like I've been there. I felt that.
mm,
I felt, and it's like something I'm still working on it because
mm-hmm.
that's tough.
It is. It is. All right, guys. I'm gonna do maybe a poor job of trying to land this plane for this conversation because we could talk for a long time about all
Well,
of
and
these
it's only
things.
the first chapter. I'm assuming he's going
Yeah,
to tease out some of the stuff and give
yeah,
us some direction.
yeah. Let me try and end here. So let's end with the premise of how he, I think, quite intelligently introduced us to the concept of sawubona. This is Zulu word, a greeting that means hello, but translates actually to "we see you," and then the appropriate response would be "sikona," which means "because you see me here, I am here." And I really, really think that what he's trying to do, I feel the same irritation, John, that you expressed in there's this question that comes up when you see all the uncomfortable things that are taking place, and the question is, what are you going to do about it? And towards the end of chapter 1, he kind of turns that on his head somewhere, and he says, that's the wrong question. And the wrong question is not what are you going to do about it, is who are you going to become.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what, which in essence, I think ties into the whole Sawubona concept of, are you willing to take the time to see someone
Mm-hmm.
instead of this this obsession with wanting people to see me, ourselves? Because I think that's where it is. It's this overarching obsession that we have in humanity, whether it's an Adventist problem, a Christian problem, or a human problem. We want people to see us. But what would it look like if everybody saw everyone else? I would say that everyone would be seen. It's a utopian picture, but I do believe that that is what Jesus came to do. Jesus was so interested in knowing people, in who they were, how they perceived life, how they functioned, and he met them according to where they were. I think that's why Jesus has become one of the most universal game changers of history, because you know, no matter what denomination of Christianity, there's this continuing rhetoric of this Jesus understands me. And there's definitely power in the fact that, you know what? Many people in this world don't understand me, but this Jesus understands me. He really does. He understands where I'm coming from. He understands the good things, the bad things, the ugly things. He sees me. And I think there's my summary of how I think he's set this book up to wherever he's going to take us. And I have a feeling it's going to be a mixture of moans and groans, maybe a few celebratory moments, maybe a few aha moments. But I really want to encourage all of you and our listeners to come and join us on this journey. You want to mention something? Go for it, Annabelle.
I don't think it's an obsession with being
Oh, you
seen.
don't?
I
Okay.
think that it's an obsession with do not take what I have and do not block me from growing. And I
Ah.
think Jesus also approached that differently. He said, I'm not taking anything from you. I am not blocking anything from you, but I am adding to everything about you.
Yeah, I need to sit with that a bit more. That's good. Yeah, I think we have tons to learn. But we can talk forever. We need to bring this to a close. No doubt at the end of each session, we probably might leave with a few more questions and answers, and that's okay. I just want to ask you to lean into the uncomfortability of that. And to those of you who are joining online, we encourage you to join our journey. Once again, the link to the book is in the description. Come be part of this Pages to Progress. We want to invite you into this space. But until the next time, next week, we wish you well, to stay safe, and to continue to dive into the uncomfortable pages that this book has to offer, because I believe that God can give us some wisdom and some direction. So this is from us, the Pages to Progress crew, wishing you God's richest blessings, and we will see you soon. All right then, take care.